Brian Harvey now faces a bleak future, walking his dog and wondering how on earth he got it so wrong.
Everyone was just trying to get hold of the audio so they can play people this extraordinary interview.
Because I've done pills myself, you know what I mean? I used to do doves. I've done 12 one night, you know what I mean? Loads of them. I've been off it.
I would certainly regard any comments of that sort as wholly wrong.
Brian Harvey said the drug was safe.
Basically, he was saying, I love the drug that kills your kids.
It near enough completely ruined his life, you know?
Why don't you just please leave him alone?
As far as I could see, the nation hated me.
All Brian's friends, one by one, was stabbing him in the back, and that was the final cut.
The media turned on me, my own band turned on me, the management turned on me, and I might as well have been the bloke that sold that girl the pill that killed her.
Here's E17!
90s boy band E17 became famous with a string of catchy hits which sealed their place in pop history. But who could have guessed that some throwaway comments about the drug ecstasy made by their pint-sized frontman Brian Harvey would shatter the E17 dream? It all went wrong on January the 15th, 1997. After 5 years at the top, the band were on top of the pops, performing Hey Child, their 11th hit single, which was riding high at number 3 in the charts. Back then, Anthony Simon was a young cub reporter in his very first job at IRN. The enthusiastic journo was hoping to get an interview with the group.
I rang Brian Harvey's management company and asked if I could get an interview with any member of E17. Probably Tony Mortimer, because he was seen to be the chief of the band. They said, come down to the Top of the Pop studios and backstage we might be able to sort something out with you.
A couple of hours later, and Anthony was sat backstage hoping he might just get a few minutes chat to Tony. As the band came off stage, Brian was asked if he could spare 5 minutes to do the interview.
I thought, you know, why can't one of the others go and do it? No, Brian, I want you to do it. Go and do it on your own.
OK, so about 10 days before, the band's songwriter, Tony Mortimer, did an interview with The Guardian Gig Guide in which he made some throwaway remarks about ecstasy. The press at large didn't pick up on these comments, though Brian heard every word he said. Oh dear.
Now, I really wanted to speak to Tony Mortimer because he's the one who'd made comments about drugs in a previous interview. But as it turned out, I was told I was going to get Brian Harvey, who didn't have any say in the matter, so I accepted it.
And I went in, sat down, normal as anything, you know, done this a million times before.
What do you think of Tony's comments about saying that ecstasy was a better drug than alcohol? Do you agree with that?
Right. I'm going to fall into one here now.
And then he came out with the sort of words that no one could really quite believe, and I couldn't believe it at the time, that's for sure.
Well, before we hear exactly what Brian had to say, let's have a look at the phenomenon that was E17. Well, it all began here in Walthamstow, and from these humble beginnings, the group went on to sell some 11 million records.
We are... Is there a name? Is there a name?
Everybody in the house of love. Everybody in the house of love.
It was August 1992 when 4 Bolshy kids from Essex stormed the charts with their debut single, House of Love. Named after their East London postcode, E17 was put together by songwriter Tony Mortimer, who recruited some local kids to make up the numbers.
I did plan to be huge. I nicked the marketing idea from New Kids on the Block and thinking we could do it better because they weren't from the street. You know, they were trying to be, but they weren't.
Oozing with attitude and sporting laughable facial hair, E17's pint-sized frontman was 5'5" Brian Harvey, a teenage plumber's assistant who'd been chosen by Tony to sing for the band.
We were basically just 4 normal guys off the street that had been given a chance.
Tony introduced the boys to the famously gay pop Svengali Tom Watkins, who'd already shown an interest in him. Tom had made millions from the Pet Shop Boys and Bros and was on the lookout for his next pop act.
The marketing that we pursued was one that was directed really by what the band had to offer. I mean, there was no good pretending that they were members of the Brains Trust, because they most certainly weren't.
Then you've got 2 characters in the background, Terry and John, who are basically doing various shapes like that and backflips and dancing, but that was really their role.
In says, I didn't really have any say, nor did John. All the attention was focused on Brian and Tony. Whatever we said never really went anyway, so me and John never used to really say a lot.
Me and Terry used to be in the background. It's like, it annoyed us, but it's like, well, we're getting paid for it, and it's all going well, so let's just carry on.
In an age of bubblegum pop, East 17 were a rough around the edges contrast to Take That and became an overnight sensation.
Girls really liked that. They saw a masculine streak in these guys as opposed to somewhat effeminate behaviour of many of the other boy bands.
This is my bedroom. I've got about 60 posters on the wall.
Oh, have you seen this one? And this, I mean, look at that.
No, I couldn't believe how successful we became. It was just, it happened so quick.
Don't feel like the geezer in the picture.
You can make anyone a star. You can take anyone's picture and put them in a magazine and they'll be famous.
Guten Tag. Danke. Danke. Dankeschön. Dankeschön. Donkey shin. Donkey shin.
I think Brian Harvey saw himself as being the big chief of the band, really. He would have bowed to the fact that Tony Mortimer wrote some great songs and gave them to Brian to sing, but he knew that nobody else could sing the songs the way that he did.
I've only just begun to know you.
And he was the one, really, when you went to the concerts, he was the one that most of the girls screamed for. So that would have given him a huge inflated image of himself.
So that was E17, and it doesn't take rocket science to work out with their young teenage audience. If you were about to talk about the Class A drug ecstasy, you'd have to be pretty careful what you said about it. So how did Brian approach the subject?
I'm going to fall into one here now.
Brian Harvey just went off on one, there's no better way of putting it.
Because I've done pills myself, you know what I mean? I used to do Doves. I've done 12 one night, you know what I mean? Loads of them, I've been off it on them, do you know what I mean? And the thing is with Doves, like, if you bang one, you go out, you have a good night. And that's what people want to do. It didn't cross my mind once about anyone that had died from taking it.
He was saying so many things pro-ecstasy that I thought, I've got to get a bit of balance here, so what does he say against it?
The dangers? Well, the dangers are, I mean, if you're frightened and you don't know whether to do it, then don't do it. Don't do it to prove a point, you know what I mean? If it brings out the better in someone, and really in the long run, it's a safe pill and ain't doing you no harm, I don't see the problem.
I just kept quiet and let him do the talking and let him talk into the microphone. I didn't need to do anything else.
All right, Brian, cheers. Best of luck with the single.
When he got back to the office, in order to balance the story, Anthony called anti-drugs campaigner Paul Betts for a quote.
We were trying to warn young people that E wasn't the safe drug that everybody thought it was. And then you get some idiot, basically like Brian Harvey, who's an icon to young people, coming out and saying how great it is.
At 6:30 the next morning, Anthony's story would be fed to 150 radio stations around the UK in time for their breakfast bulletins. As he put the finishing touches to it on Wednesday night, this 23-year-old junior reporter, just 6 months into the job, was oblivious to having just scooped one of the biggest showbiz stories of the year.
I thought, yeah, it might get picked up by a few of the tabloids in their showbiz columns, but I had no idea it was actually going to make it to the front pages.
That night, as Brian Harvey went to bed here in his Essex home, thinking everything was going to be all right, he would never have guessed that by the next morning, journalists would be laying siege to his house, spurred into action by his incredible remarks. It was the tragic death of Leah Betts 14 months earlier which had made ecstasy a household name and frightened parents everywhere.
Leah Betts' life support machine was switched off 5 days after she took an ecstasy tablet at her birthday party.
It sparked a major moral panic. It was a time when newspaper editors and politicians woke up and realised that there was a mass drug culture in the country and it was their children who were driving it.
Ecstasy is already easy to buy in many nightclubs. Police say young people associate it with having fun. Getting the message across that it kills is difficult.
I think people still thought that ecstasy was the same as heroin. I think they thought that people who took ecstasy were like huge drug addicts who would go around like raping their children. Unfortunately, instead of putting balanced stories across, the older reporters were saying, great, we can just run another scare story.
With tabloid sensationalism running high, the government condemned everything to do with dance culture.
No drug is soft and no drug is safe.
The Public Order Bill had effectively outlawed raves. Ecstasy had become a political hot potato, and Brian Harvey had just blundered right into the thick of the ecstasy row. On Thursday morning, Brian received a rude awakening from the Mirror newspaper.
The door knocker was going and the bell was ringing, so I thought some silly bird had sold a story or some rubbish like that. So I've got this idea of what they're here for, and I've opened the door and just said to them, you know, come in, and they sort of looked at each other, and I said, yeah, come in, you're all right. Didn't even ask them what they wanted. So I said, right, what's the problem? And I picked up the TV remote and clicked the TV on at the same time and went to talk to her. And John Major came on the TV, the second the TV came on, and I swear to God, he said my name the second the picture came on, and I was like...
Can I ask my honourable friend what his reaction is to the comments today from Brian Harvey of E17, who says that ecstasy makes people feel better and that he takes up to 12 tablets a day?
Drug taking, whatever drug it may be, tends to lead on to hard drugs, and we've seen often enough the tragedy that occurs.
And I listened to what he said, and I looked at these two people, and I said, what's going on?
I don't think we had any concept of the furor that would sort of exist and carry on over the next week or so. I don't think any of us really did.
The Mirror reporters in Brian's front room had an idea for a really tasteful photo opportunity.
And she said, well, if you hold this picture up, I'll get my cameraman to take a shot of you. And I took the photo out, and it was a picture of Leah Betts laying there in a coma on the bed with, like, the tubes coming out of her nose, and she wanted me to hold it up and look at it like I felt a bit sad for her. I mean, how pathetic is that? You know? Where was that going to go? So I took the photo, threw it at her, took the geezer's camera, and said, get out of my house, now, get out. And he was like, yeah, but I said, get out, and I pushed him, get out, took the geezer's camera, get out. And I threw his camera out in the grass, and I closed the door, and I sat on my stairs, and I put my head in my hands, and I was like, what is going on?
As Brian's ecstasy interview aired on Thursday's radio news bulletins, Fleet Street hacks seized the story and sharpened their knives in preparation for a field day in Friday's papers.
I got into work and I couldn't believe it. The place had just gone crazy. The newsroom was taking calls from all over the place, from the tabloids, not just the tabloids, the broadsheets, from politicians, from the BBC, our big rivals. Everyone wanted a part of the story.
Newspaper editors, newspaper news editors would have just said, right, you know, he's an idiot, he's a Burke, let's just crucify him.
The comments from the group's frontman will be taken on board by East 17's millions of teenage fans. Brian Harvey has said ecstasy is safe and boasted about taking as many as 12 tablets in one night.
Within hours, E17 were dropped from forthcoming TV appearances and 14 radio stations banned their records.
Radio stations across the country have banned East 17's music.
These are just the rantings of a not particularly intelligent young man.
I deplore Brian Harvey, East 17, for his comments. Seems to me the ecstasy drug has already taken effect on his brain.
A part of me, I'll be honest, was like, hey, I'm on telly. That ain't so bad, this ain't about a pill. But it was everyone else's comments about, oh, you know, other people have died and this and that made me feel like, oh, you shouldn't have said that.
All the campaigning that's been going on by voluntary bodies and others can now be jeopardised by the fact that he's come out with these stupid remarks.
Everyone was just feeding off each other. As soon as there was a moral panic, everyone had to leap in, especially because it was an election year and the Tories desperately wanted to hold on to their seats. They were just running with it. There was no time for reflection. The story moved so quickly.
I spoke to a 12-year-old schoolgirl in my constituency, and she said that she will be taking down the posters of East 17.
I think the reaction to what Harvey said was so extreme just because of the market he was selling his records to, teenagers and pre-teens. Basically, he was saying, I love the drug that kills your kids, as far as the politicians were concerned.
After kicking out the Mirror reporters, Brian called his management company, where he spoke to Tom Watkins' sister, Sally Shires, who with Tom was now managing the band.
And I said, Sally,
what's going on? I said, I've been on the news. I said, John Major's talking about me. I've just had press around my house. What's going on? And she went, oh, Brian, you know, you shouldn't have said anything about the drugs and that. And I was like, what do you mean I shouldn't have? What are you talking about, man? You told me to do it on my own. What's the matter with you? It's your fault. You made me do that interview. Why'd you make me do it on my own? Why? I said, you've set me up. You have set me up.
Set up? Set up? Why would anyone want to set up the singer of a band at the top of the charts? Well, unbeknown to their legions of loyal fans, behind the scenes, E17 have been fighting like dogs for years. The band's problems really began way back in 1994 with rows over money.
If you're in a boy band, it's very, very, very hard for you to make money just by being a puppet in a band. The way you make money is really by being the manager. Forget about being in a boy band, be the manager. If you can't be the manager, be the songwriter. And so in E17, the people who would have made the money would have been Tom Watkins, who was the manager, and Tony Mortimer, who was the songwriter.
And it was like, something's going on. You know, we should have more than this. We're all doing the same amount of work. We're all getting up the same time in the morning. You know, we're all being inconvenienced with flying to Lithuania to do a gig, you know. And the way we saw it, it should have been completely fair.
Brian was continually bellyaching about not having as much money as Tony, but then Tony was writing all the material.
Songwriter Tony Mortimer, who'd formed the band, was churning out the pop hits.
Thank you very much.
But Brian wasn't happy.
You know, I can put up with Tony earning more money. I could put up with that. But at least let me be singing something that I'm into. I don't even listen to pop music. I hate pop music.
When the thunder calls you from a mountain high, it's time to spread your wings and fly. Spread your wings and fly.
Brian blamed Tom and Tony for the band's poppy image.
We had the record company above us, and you know, they would insist on us keeping on the same road and guiding us. And when you're in a bubble, you can't just suddenly change and expect the record company would agree with such a change, because they wouldn't.
I felt sorry for Brian because, like, obviously he had to sing a lot of the songs. I think more people was like, oh, you know what I mean, sweet little thing. But the songs he really wanted to be doing was R&B, you know, with all the licks going on.
By now, resentful over the money situation and unhappy with his image, Brian, who fancied himself as an R&B bad boy, started to really become one.
He was just a complete pain in the arse. We were just having to make up stories and cover for him the whole time. He wouldn't get up.
We'd all be getting up on time, and then we'd go round for Brian, and he wasn't even out of bed, so we'd be sitting in the van for another half hour.
He would refuse to go.
We went to airports and we missed flights because of Brian, do you know what I mean?
He wouldn't stand next to Tony.
Shut your face, right?
His attitude had changed to, and I quote, "I am this band, without me this band is nothing."
He wouldn't do this. He wanted that. He wanted to be on a box. He wanted to be taller. He wanted the best outfits. It was unreal.
Ooh. Well, with this in mind, now that Brian was up to his eyes in it after his ecstasy clangor with the press and MPs baying for his blood, what would happen next?
On Thursday afternoon, manager Tom Watkins called the press and put out an apology on Brian's behalf. Brian had his own ideas, and now besieged at home by the press, he allowed a news crew into his front room and apologised on live TV.
Now the singer has told London Tonight he was sorry for what he said.
You know, obviously there was going to be a lot of different people speaking for me and saying Brian's this and Brian's that and Brian blah, blah, blah. And I thought, well, surely it'd be better for it to come from the horse's mouth.
In fact, we can hear from him now because he spoke to our reporter, Richard Gaisford, at his home in Loughton in Essex.
You know, it all come out wrong. But, you know, the only people I want to apologise to is the Betts family out there if you're watching, because I didn't mean any of this.
Maybe I'm just cynical, but it was very tongue-in-cheek. Oh, well, you know, this is harm minimisation. I've been told I better apologise or else. And I can never be certain in my own mind that that apology was genuine.
It's all rubbish. The bloke asked me a question, you know, it got out of hand, they took things out of text, and it's all up on the telly, you know, I'm looking like some kind of drug baron.
It was basically, you know, desperate scrabble by Brian to try to survive.
Because what people are saying is that you're saying in this interview, and we have heard it, that these ecstasy pills are good, and they're thinking that your fans are going to want to go and do it because they idolise you.
The thing is, what I'd say to our fans is don't do it. Don't do it. Don't even go and try. If you haven't tried it, don't go and try. If you've done it, don't do it no more, because it really is rubbish.
It really didn't sound like something that Brian would have said at all, and it was just very obvious backtracking from his comments earlier.
So do you still do drugs now?
Well, you know, I smoke weed every now and then, but I mean, people know that. I mean, who doesn't, you know?
He'd still got to add that little bit on the end, but hey, I do marijuana, doesn't everybody? Because I've still got to look cool to the fans. That's how it came over to me.
And if you actually look at his eyes during that interview, then that might give some indication as well.
Now, the Prime Minister's been mentioning you in the House of Commons today. Can you believe that?
I know. That's a mad one, isn't it? I don't know what is going on, really, I don't.
The lead singer of the pop group East 17 today stirred up and then tried to defuse a row about the drug ecstasy. First, in a radio interview, Brian Harvey said the drug was safe. Then came the protests from Leah Betts' father, radio stations and the Prime Minister. After all that, Harvey admitted he'd been wrong.
Brian's apology would do little to prevent the mauling in Friday's papers.
Well, the press reaction on a Friday was just, you know, let's show what an idiot he is and what a corrupting influence he is on young people today. I mean, any, you know, vilification that they can throw at Harvey, they did.
Basically, I was just turned into public enemy #1 in every single paper. Not one person in any paper had a good thing to say about me. You know, as far as I could see, the nation hated me. And, you know, I mean, how would you feel?
Brian's apology really wasn't reported as an apology. It was just reported as, here's a guy who doesn't even know what he's talking about, really, or he can't be logical from one moment to the next. So they had a clock with the time when he admitted taking drugs, and then a few hours later, another clock saying, you know, and now he's contradicting himself. So they were just, you know, showing him as being just some joke.
The Mirror tagged an entire ecstasy shock issue on the back of Brian's comments, and with Middle England ecstasy hysteria running at fever pitch, by Friday lunchtime the Conservatives were considering a prosecution.
Brian Harvey's guilty, says another MP, of urging youngsters to break the law.
Because that is what they are doing when they say to young people, as Mr. Harvey did, if it makes you feel better and gives you something to do at the weekend and you go out and have a good time, I don't see why not, man, because life's too short, you know what I mean, man.
I just think it probably reflects, for a number of MPs, the seriousness of Brian's remarks.
A Home Office minister on hand said yes, remarks like that from people he said had more fame than brain could be illegal.
It is indeed an offence for a person to incite another to commit an offence under the Act.
They're talking about me in the Commons and that, and I just thought to myself, am I going to get nicked? Have I done something really bad or something?
I mean, when the Crown Prosecution Services were threatening to arrest the whole band for inciting children to take Class A drugs, you can imagine it gets up to be a little bit more serious.
While this was turning into the worst week of Brian's life, for Tom and Tony, things were looking up. They now had the perfect excuse to sack Brian.
The band were very aware of how I felt about him. They, at the time, were equally as convinced that that was the only thing for them to do. So, again, it was a joint decision by everybody that he should go.
On Friday afternoon, a letter stating that Brian was sacked was signed by the other band members and delivered to Brian's house by East 17's road manager.
And he went, I got this for you. And I was, what's that? And I was sort of laughing at him, what's that, what's that? And he was like, I've got to give it to you, open it. And I was like, what is it, man? Was it check? As soon as I took it out, I knew exactly what it was. And I've seen these 3 signatures on there, you know, Tony, Terry, John. Basically, you're out the band. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I can still see the letter now with the signatures on it and that, and it just haunts me. And I started to get pissed off. The first thing I thought was, Terry, John, how have they got him to sign that?
Tom's views were like, if you don't sack him, then basically you're going to be classed the same as Brian, do you know what I mean? A drug taker, you're going to look bad with your family. And I rung up No, I think I just signed it in the end. I think I just signed it because they had the other 2 signatures.
And it said in the letter, basically, that Brian had to go or Tony was going to go. I didn't want to be categorised in the same thing as Brian, like as just drug taking, whatever, you know? And I knew we'd get Brian back in the band anyway. And I was only signing it as a temporary thing.
The letter turned up at my house already signed by the other 2, and so I just signed it as well. And then it was signed, it was done and dusted, it was that simple.
Meanwhile, to distance the rest of the band from disgraced Brian, Tom released a statement telling the press of Brian's sacking. Anthony Simon, who broke the story, was one of the journalists he spoke to.
Given that I was the journalist who'd wrecked Brian Harvey's career, supposedly, Tom Watkins was quite pleasant to me on the phone, I must admit. I mean, I could have cost him a lot of money, but he seemed fine. He didn't seem too unhappy at the fact that he had to get rid of Brian Harvey.
If I sounded happy and delirious, that's probably the understatement of the year. I mean, I couldn't think of anything more amazing happening to me, that I would finally rid myself without any conscience, without any kind of a lack of allegiance to Tony, because we were both thrilled that the arseholes were going to be history.
Here, the lead singer of the pop group East 17 paid the price tonight for saying ecstasy was safe in a radio interview yesterday. Although Brian Harvey later said sorry, that wasn't enough for the other members of his group. Tonight they sacked him.
The day that the music nearly died for East 17, they kicked the singer out of town, and now the surviving members of the band are left to carry on without him after a showdown meeting with their manager. Earlier, the remaining members of the band had left Loughton in Essex after delivering an uncompromising message to their disgraced lead singer that they would never work with him again.
From then, I kind of took the full brunt as being the guy that sacked him, you know, as making the decision. Yeah, I made the decision, and so did the other 2. We had to make the decision together. We've done him probably the biggest favour in his life, believe me. By sacking him, that stopped him going inside. I don't think he realises that to this day.
I was glad to see that the full consequences and ramifications of what he had said were brought home to him fairly promptly, and I think that is a step in the right direction.
When the news came through that
each other, basically, that's what they're doing, they're just destroying each other.
By the time of Brian's ecstasy blunder, East 17 were on the brink of collapse. Brian was convinced he was no longer wanted in the band, and the fact that Tony was now singing lead vocals on Hey Child only made matters worse.
There was a new lineup happening to East 17, and I was being edged out.
No, he knows it's not true. He knows it's not true. He knows the conspiracy theory, the FBI, CIA, MFI being involved in this conspiracy against him is just complete paranoia. I think he probably might have picked up a hint that no one liked him anymore, but you wouldn't have to be Einstein to pick that up.
Just days before Brian's ecstasy interview, Tom Watkins had called a crisis meeting in a last-ditch effort to sort out East 17's differences.
This was a big meeting that we was going to have. Everyone was there.
Brian was adamant that he wanted the band to sack Tom, whose management contract was nearly expired anyway. Brian believed he'd convinced Tony of the same.
And the day before that, me, Terry and John had been round to Tony's house, right? And sat down with Tony and said, Tone, this is it now, right? We're all together, because I thought we was all together now, yeah? We're all together, we're going to go and see Tom tomorrow, and we're going to tell him what we think of him. And you're going to tell him what you think as well.
Tony did not have the bollocks to tell Brian Harvey how much he hated him, and he couldn't handle conflict and confrontation. So I had to fire a lot of bullets for Tony at this particular meeting. It developed into the most incredible slanging match.
And I stood up and I said, you know what? I don't fucking like you. I said, I don't like the way you earn your money. I don't like your mind games and your lies. And still you want to sign us for another 5 years and rinse us again? No way. I said, I'll never sign another contract with you.
I sort of walked out with Tony in the end, and the man was shocked. I mean, he was just rigid with anger, with stress. There was no patching it up. The decision was made that Tony did not want to work with Brian or the other 2 guys again, really.
On the Saturday morning of Brian's worst week, Terry and John, without Tony, paid a visit to Brian's house, fueling press rumours that they might have him back in the band.
All I can say is, why don't you just please leave him alone? Because he's like, you know what I mean? He's had a few days of it now.
They done all that they could, you know, to try and get me back in there, but it was being controlled by a higher source, the management.
John, is E17 going to continue? No comment. Have you been speaking to Brian today at all? No comment.
I'm sure with this meeting that John and Terry had with Brian, Brian did an amazing job, as he would with his equals, of convincing them of his right and his standing in the band and that his reinstatement.
He didn't mean what he said.
Do you think he's going to come back to the group? Is that what you're saying?
No comment.
I knew that would get rid of Tom. That was the way that Brian was going to get back into the band, by getting rid of Tom, because Tom was the problem.
Remember, one's a roofer, one's a printer, one's a plumber. Do you know what I mean? So just imagine, in Essex. So just put two and two, can imagine the dialogue going down. And then suddenly it's, well, fuck me, you know, I can't go back roofing, you know. Well, my print works is packed up, you know, it's, well, we better get this sorted out, don't we? You know what I mean? Want to puff of this.
Do you want E17 to continue, John?
Hey, mate, of course I do, mate. It's my living, it's what I do for my life, you know?
Are you still speaking to Brian, John?
Quite frankly, whatever Terry and John had said at that moment in time was absolutely and totally inconsequential, because the entire decision-making rested with Tony.
Well, the band's manager, Tom Watkins, joins me now for the very latest. Tom, it looks a bit confused. Is there any chance Brian will be allowed back in the band?
Absolutely no way. In fact, the boys have had no conversations with Brian Harvey today, and the band are going to carry on as a three-piece, as was stated in the press statement that we made on Friday.
The media turned on me, my own band turned on me, the management turned on me, and I might as well have been the bloke that sold that girl the pill that killed her.
Baby, if you got to go away, don't think I could take the pain. Won't you stay another day?
He would have you believe that this was the worst thing that ever happened to him, getting kicked out of that band. He forgets he didn't want to be in the band no more. You know, he's obviously forgotten that.
I think what this whole saga says about boy bands and drugs is if you're a boy band and you're taking drugs, which you most probably are if you're in a boy band, don't own up to it. Lie about it. Say you hate drugs. Say they're the scourge of the earth, and say you're a role model to young people, and you know, you believe that drug taking should be banned. Stick to soft drinks.
But before Brian's worst week was over, there would be one final humiliation, and it came in Tuesday's Sun. A not-so-innocent 16-year-old schoolgirl who Brian had been dating had sold her story.
She was just a silly bird. I must have said to her something like, you know, I'm all over the TV, my profile's gone through the roof, I just, you know, I can't see you anymore. The next thing I know, she's in the paper doing a story.
Turn the lights low and put some music on.
And she told me she was 18, and then it comes out in the paper and she's 16 and that, and I'm just like, oh my God. You know, thank God she weren't 15.
Again, the press arrived on Brian's doorstep, and now jobless and bleary-eyed, he was hauled out of bed, still wearing his Bugs Bunny pyjamas. It was the kind of photo opportunity the press dream of.
I don't think Brian was set up when he did the IRN interview, but I think he was undoubtedly set up for the pyjama shot, really. There he was, captured in his full glory, you know, his toughest street member, gangster rapper of E17 with Bugs Bunny pyjamas on. Now, that would have destroyed him more, really, than any ecstasy.
So, Brian's worst week was over. At the height of ecstasy hysteria, Brian Harvey had been made a sacrificial lamb at the altar of Middle England morality. And it just so happens that Tom and Tony were delighted to see the back of him as well. But what happened to E17 next? Terry, John and Tony carried on without Brian for a couple more months until Tom Watkins' management contract expired, at which point Terry and John invited Brian back into the band.
I walked in right in the middle of a rehearsal and the place just went mad, and I was like, brilliant, and I'm back, do you know what I mean? It was a great feeling.
Baby, if you got to go away.
I'm glad to be back in there. I should never have been sacked anyway, you know what I mean? It was all silly, really. It all got blown out of proportion, you know, but it's all sorted out now. And I just couldn't believe it. It was a dream come true.
But it wasn't to last. A couple of days after Brian's return, Tony resigned, spelling the end for E17.
The scandal that was thrown up around the ecstasy was probably the nail in the coffin for me in terms of my last bit of energy. Why did I resign? God, who wouldn't have?
Brian, Terry and John reformed, oblivious to the drugs connotations of their new name, E17. After a couple of hits, they too disappeared.
What I learned out of the whole sort of scenario of managing E17 was never sign anyone you fancy. And that was it. The boys next door are very appealing to a gay man. Unfortunately, what's between their two ears isn't so appealing. And as far as I'm concerned, never again.
So there we have it, a cautionary pop tale if ever there was one. But what's happened to the Walthamstow boys since?
Tony is working as a songwriter for new artists. Terry now lives in Spain, where he runs a bar. John is once again working as a roofer. And Brian, well, he's been back on the front pages.
Singer Brian Harvey came to court without a record and went home with one. The jury decided he didn't punch a photographer outside Stringfellows, but he did kick him with his bare feet. Not guilty of assault, but guilty of a fray.
I don't want to get into trouble. It just finds me wherever I go. Really, it does, and I could do without it.
And more recently, it found him again in the shape of a machete when he was attacked outside a nightclub.
I mean, how much can you take, you know?
What if I told you?
Well, in 2002, he took 56 days in jail for harassing his ex-wife, and a year later was in the dock again accused of possessing and supplying cocaine. But this time he left court, as the judge said, without a stain on his character. It transpired he was set up by the News of the World in a sting that backfired.
Sleeps with another man.
Oh dear, what a week. Sacked from the band for the ecstasy comments. I had an affair. I got caught out in poor Bugs Bunny pyjamas. Worst week of my life.